The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, the group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Hawaiian Volcano Tracker update. Today, Thursday, November 10th, 2022. How you doing today, Dane?
Doing good.
I'm still recovering a little bit from my virus
Right.
last week, so I'm apologies in advance again. I think I'm not going to be quite as loud on microphone, but I am going to try to keep it short today. So everyone knows, I'm trying to not cover as many of the basics, but focus on what's really been changed on Kīlauea and Mauna Loa here this week.
Keyword there is trying. No promises.
Yeah, yeah. I always try to make it short, but it doesn't always work out that way. So I've tried a little harder, and we'll see how that goes.
Right.
So the story, Dan, today is both volcanoes are filling underground, right? On the surface, not a whole lot has changed. A little bit on Kilauea, a couple minor little things, but mostly it's underground signals. They're both filling underground. Kilauea more underground than on the surface, it seems like right now. And then we have some community events to talk about coming up, and that's more or less what we have on the menu today.
Right.
So if you got anything to add here before we get going?
I mean, I'd just like to repeat, the message that I put out. I know you have a message about earthquakes that you talk about. My message is about more panic. Panic is something to be avoided at all costs when it comes time for any real disaster. Panic will only make things worse. You can turn situations that are relatively benign into deadly, dangerous situations really quickly at the drop of a dime just because somebody panics and does something crazy. There's no need for that. There'll be issues with, any eruption or large earthquake. The panic will only make it worse. Know what to expect and the realm of possibilities that'll help, rein it in, especially the likelihood. Just because something, like this is the worst case scenario doesn't mean it's the most likely, right? So as always, just don't panic, and we'll go over all the stuff, all the latest data, and when something eventually does happen, because we know it will, just keep, cool head on the shoulders.
Yeah, it's true. It's only a matter of time. We hope it's a longer time than a shorter time, but it is just a matter of time, no matter what. So yeah, great advice there. Thanks for that.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess I'll jump into the summary of our 2 volcanoes here today, and I'll flash up Kilauea first. Here's a nice image Dane pulled from us from the KW webcam from the USGS HVO, showing a rainbow over that summit crater of Kilauea, Hawaiʻi crater within a caldera. It's called Kaluapele. And there's that. And as a little summary, I'll just show you guys this last week of the S1 camera. It's showing that lava lake as it's silver in the daytime, glowing at night over here. But also, there's a couple other spots here on the right that we see some extra little changes on the surface. Minor, maybe a little skylight or another pit that's got lava in it over there. But that's the kind of change we're seeing on the surface in Kilauea. Pretty minor there. We'll talk about underground stuff here a little bit later as well. But to summarize Mauna Loa, here's a nice picture from Mauna Loa that Dane captured from earlier this week. Nice sunrise coming over the rim there. Dry, not a whole lot of steam up there at that exact moment. And here is the updated earthquake graph. So I've added on another little bit here at the right end. And you can see that the elevated levels that USGS is calling 40 to 50 earthquakes. That's in this range right in here like that. So that's that elevated range. It's been gone back to about September 20th or so. It seemed like it had a little bit of a low for that 1 week in here, but it seems like it's back. It's up and down, but it's still at what we consider the elevated background levels. Not nearly as much as before. Here is that seismic crisis, as it's sometimes called, where we had all those earthquakes in a short time coming under the surface. That was a little more worrisome, a little bit more of an escalation. So no escalation, really, since the beginning of October, but still elevated background rates. That's the summary from Mauna Loa there. And kind of to tie it all together, really, this is the slide that we pulled from the USGS presentation from the community meetings here. This is the average motion of GPS over the last 6 months. So you're just really showing Mauna Loa swelling underground and Kilauea swelling underground, and that's our take-home message today of what's going on. So I just thought I'd flash that back up there as a nice reminder and tie in to before. So the most recent USGS update. This is our data source, and we're kind of compiling things to make it a nice flowing story for you guys here. But the long and short of the summary is that not a whole lot has changed in the summary itself. Really, the major changes we see are the reports of how many earthquakes per day. The last 24 hours have had 44. That's the same 40 to 50 range that's elevated. And if we scroll down here, we can see the background is thought to be 10 to 20, and that's risen to 40 to 50 per day right there. And we still have GPS showing inflation, and we still have the tilt not showing inflation, which they are explaining to us means that the magma is filling in at that deeper level there, greater than 2 miles down. And so that's continuing. It's causing earthquakes shallower in the volcano. As magma is still coming in, that's the bottom line. It's still filling underground. It's still adjusting, but it hasn't escalated towards any kind of breaking point. And when and if it does that, it's just, obviously it's a matter of time, but it may not progress up and up and up. It may actually wind back down before going back up, or it could go up. We'll just have to wait and see. But so far, really, it's the same situation as last week. It's really not a whole lot has changed on Mauna Loa. So looking at the earthquakes that have occurred here in the past week, and let me get our Mauna Loa caption up here. So here's the earthquakes for the last week and across the whole island. And as usual, we have our background earthquakes on the north part of the island. We have our Pahala earthquakes in the south. Kilauea is over here. Mauna Loa is what we're going to focus on to start. And a few earthquakes here, a handful on the southeast flank, but otherwise that same pattern of earthquakes underneath the main summit caldera and upper southwest rift, and that nice line. That's the orientation of that blade of magma filling inside the volcano. That, you know, we've often thought of magma chambers as being kind of ovals or spheres kind of things, but really it's a combination of all different kinds of geometries. And Mauna Loa seems like it might have a smaller, more spherical or flatter kind of structure, but the most of the majority of the magma is in that long blade that's in that orientation like that. So very long, very tall, and fairly thin. Yeah, only a meter or a yard or so, or a few meters wide kind of thing. And then as it pushes to the southeast, it causes these flank earthquakes over here. This side actually seems to move because Kilauea over here to the southeast also moves. Into the northwest, Hualalai does not move as much, or Mauna Kea over here, so you often have this catching point and you get this zone of earthquakes here in the northwest. And so all that's normal. That's what's been happening for years and years and years now. It's more about the rates at which it happens rather than where the things are actually happening. That hasn't changed a whole lot. So in the last week, here's the largest earthquake, was a 3.7. That was actually a week ago today, right after last week's Thursday evening time slot. And that one was at 3.7 kilometers down, so that's down below sea level in that base of the volcano. We'll look at the depths here shortly. But the next one, the 3.6, was yesterday. That was at 6:20 p.m. local time yesterday. 2 kilometers down, so also slightly below sea level right in there. And beyond that, 2.9, that was shallower, that followed the one last week. And 0.6, shallow, 1 kilometer above sea level here under the caldera. So that's kind of the highlights of the seismicity. And 3.6 it's getting there, but you know, as we see activity escalate, you'd be more worried if it was a 4 to a 5 kind of thing. And we've seen quite a few of these 3s up in here. And they are significant because they're happening more and more and more. I'll point them out on the graph here in a minute. So turning to the monitoring data, here's the earthquake rates for the past month. I showed you guys a plot that was extended for the whole last 2 months, right? So the scale is actually different. Before, the scale was up to, what was it, 200 earthquakes per day or something like that. So our scale here maxes out at 70. So our range really in the last month has been from 60 down to, that's under 10 for this one point right over here, but mostly 20 to 60, somewhere in that range. And you can see this variation up and down, kind of a sawtooth pattern. And it's really the consistently elevated and the rising, accelerating rates is what you'd worry about. So this looks normal. It's still elevated, as we said at the top here, but still elevated and showing signs of filling, and lower than that peak that we had a couple months ago. Zooming out to the last year, these are earthquakes per week now over here. So our most recent week was at 300 or so. And if you count it from Thursday to Thursday, which this actually doesn't go Thursday to Thursday. But you can see here that build up and that spike that happened not quite 2 months ago. And then that kind of ramping down and then coming back up. And so here we are. It's still elevated, clearly below what we saw in that previous September, and going further back before we saw June all the way back to the beginning of the year. So it's still elevated, and magma is still coming in much more now than it was, you can see, a few months ago, right? And causing that adjustment. So filling underground. For the last 5 years, here's a context. See, we've had other spikes of earthquakes of filling magma in that same structure in the past. And you can see in the past they've come and gone and come and gone, and this is obviously a larger amount, higher magnitude here. We're actually over 1,000 earthquakes for 2 months in a row, the last 2 months in a row. We're hitting November here, and we'll just wait and see what this progresses to be. But this is, of course, why we're part of the USGS and civil defense outreach efforts here, to make sure that people are focused on preparation, just in case that worst case does come. Not that it's expected, but there's no time like the present to be prepared. So here's a map for the last week of earthquakes on Mauna Loa Summit, and this is a little different from that other map we saw right over here, because this one has got a magnitude cutoff. I want to say it's somewhere, it's a higher cutoff. So this map basically is showing us more earthquakes, and it shows us the pattern of even the very, very small ones. And the same pattern, the coloration here is red for shallower and orange for slightly deeper. So you can see the northwest quadrant here has these oranges, it's slightly deeper than these shallower events that are right underneath the caldera here. Mauna Loa. So for the whole last month, similar pattern, right? This is all following that seismic crisis we had 2 months ago. So you can see that adjustment has been ongoing continually for the whole last month since that occurred. Okay, moving down to the other monitoring signals. Here is our 1 week tilt, and the blue line is the one that's the radial to the inflationary source, like the center of swelling for Mauna Loa. Usually that place can move around depending on where the pressure is building in that blade. So it can be sometimes a little bit more to the west, a little bit more to the east, or so on and so forth. But based on the one signal we have here, you can see it's basically not a whole lot of change. It's almost a little variation. Right? So you're probably having adjustments, movement of magma from one portion to the other as the pressure is migrating across. But nothing really, really major, no huge acceleration there. It's hard to see the 1 month plot because of a green spike during that earthquake that occurred in the flank last month here, is throwing our scale off to all the way up to 80 microradians. So in this context, you really don't see a whole lot of change. You can go back and say that, okay, we're slightly below 0, maybe a -2, and we're maybe above 0, +2. So it's very, very hard to see and hard to really tie this activity to a long-term change. I think most of that happened during that little movement during the month rather than being gradually, right? So it's happened in little pulses. The GPS has continued to show this extension. The line is going up, meaning that these two stations, MOKP and MLSP, are getting further apart over time. Sometimes they're getting further apart faster, and sometimes getting further apart a little bit slower. That's the rate that we're interested in here. How fast are they spreading? We know magma's coming in, and as it comes in, it's going to push those two sides apart. It's about how fast it's doing so, and sometimes it actually will sag back like that, right? So that was part of the pattern earlier in the year. And so far, we're still heading up. So even though we've seen the tilt, that would indicate those shallower, less than 2 miles deep movement of magma into the volcano, that deeper, below 2 miles deep, still seems to be coming in. As you can see, the whole thing is still swelling here. And that's the horizontal line length, and this was the up and down. You can see it's still rising upwards slowly. It hasn't accelerated or anything like that. It's steadily coming up. You can see it was rising slowly before, and it was right around here that it got steeper in that slope and showing that accelerated rate of rising. Over the last 5 years, just for context, here we are. That's that little rising and a little dip right over here at the right end. You can see we've had similar ones before. This was spring of 2021, and going back to the end of 2020, there was also a little bit of that going on there. But you can see there's these little wiggles, are adjustments that occur, and so that's the question: is are we just having a smaller adjustment, or will it lead to something more? And we'll have to wait and see, of course. Here's an up signal, and similarly, you can see rising up, and even those earlier instances, they were rising up and at similar rates to what we're seeing now. All right, so that's the GPS. I'm going a little bit more depth here, just briefly, but looking at some of the other signals. There's a tiltmeter station at Sleeping Cave on the upper southwest rift at 10,000 feet. 10,000 feet is actually outside of the summit zone, so as magma is moving into that deeper part of the rift, it can show signals here potentially. I mean, deep, shouldn't say deeper, because the tilt's only measuring that upper 2 miles underground, right? But it's has to be coming from the summit, through the summit to get to this kind of area. So it's hard to tell exactly what's happening here, but if you were to consider this to be potentially influenced by the volcano, then it looks like it's actually deflating. So migrating more towards the summit rather than down in the flanks. And I say that because I've looked at this GPS plot here before as well, and the key is that if you look at the, these are 3 components. This is east, west, north, south, and up, down. So let's just focus on the bottom panel over here. And so we're starting up at 12,570 feet, and up at that elevation, not quite 13,000, but getting close, you see the signal is still going up, right? So we're still coming up. That's what really matters. That's what we're going to focus on here. You come down to 12,140 feet at Pohako Hanalei, and there you see we were rising, and now we don't seem to be rising anymore, right? So it seems like that center, the area that was bulging upwards is still bulging upwards, but it's slightly smaller. It's not reaching as far down a mountain as before, and that's likely because of the adjustments that we've seen occurring over the last couple months here. So it's still got room to, still has room to swell some more, is the bottom line there, right? It's not, doesn't look like it's near a breaking point yet, even considering what it was doing within the last 2 months here. So, and if I were to scroll down, you'll see that all the other stations have had no change and are up and down here. And this is going down southwest rift of Mauna Loa, and I'll just leave it at that here and move on and summarize with this plot that was most recently presented at that community meeting in South Kona by USGS and Civil Defense, and posted by Two Pineapples recently. So if you haven't had a chance to watch that, it's similar to the other presentations, but it is posted online. You guys can check that out. And this is now looking at the last 4 months. And this is just cool to be able to see a slightly different time scale. There's a GPS for the last 4 months, and you can see without that whole year-long context, you can see the wiggles coming down and up, and ortho's there, and there's that steeper part, and here's that shallower segment that we're in right now. So that looks fairly similar, just a little more spread out there. The tilt is cool to look at for the last 4 months because you can really see the various signals that were placed here, right? There was actually this little wiggles up and down, we don't worry about as much, but this step coming up right here, that one matters. That was that first signal of shallow magma coming into the volcano. Prompted a USGS article. And then it seemed like it was doing its regular thing here and kind of going slightly down. And then here, this was the main seismic crisis, occurred during this kind of step upwards right here. And then there was a third one that occurred right over here as well, right? So that's the general trend. The tiltmeter is showing that magma came shallower once, came shallower again for a slightly extended period of time there, and then it's come shallower again, but recently hasn't yet, but would not be surprised if it does it again, right? And probably the more frequent we see these things, the more likely we are headed towards some surface activity. But so far, not enough to be convincing that it's actually going to do that. It's the pattern you expect leading up to an eruption, but it's not guaranteed to lead to an eruption, if that makes sense. And here are the earthquake counts for the last 4 months, right? Showing that we actually, during this earlier shallow tilt signal back in early August, also had a spike of seismicity. That's why those go together. And similarly here, that seismicity and that tilt rise also go together, right? And then over here, this was actually a shallow earthquake that occurred, I believe. Well, it does not quite look plotted that way here. So another signal coming in here likely as well. So that's the summary, the last 4 months here. And put it in context, here's our cross-section of Mauna Loa, bulging down below sea level, the oceanic crest of the earth here, and where the earthquakes occur. These are the deep Pahala earthquakes over here in this area. And then we have the earthquakes within a mountain. The ones that are northwest are over here. The ones that are under the summit are over here. And then we had back in mid-October flank earthquakes, which are all these series over here. Right? You can see how that southeast flank has a lot more distributed seismicity than that northwest flank that's actually stuck all lie back up in here. So in this same view, this was actually mid-September to mid-October. But to put it in context, I'm going to flash it to how we are now. Oops, in the right size. Let's try that again. Size bigger. Oh, right. So a little bit too big. So there, compared to the last 2 days here. So still, these are the big earthquakes we saw northwest and at the summit. So that 3.6, 3.5 are in here, or actually the 3.5 is in here, and the one last week is off this map, and you can see still having some deep Pahala earthquakes, right? But nothing on the flank and nothing anywhere else. Look at it a different way. Blow this up again. Let the CPU catch up to me here. All right, so this is time on the bottom. This is actually the last 2 days, and this is the depth. We're missing the very, very top up here. Normally we go up to 2.5, so we're missing a bar at the top, but you can see that over time we had these cluster of slightly deeper earthquakes within that summit complex, and some shallow ones following it, but really disconnected from anything happening deeper down. And to zoom out from this, let's make it not just 2 days, but let's go out back to the whole last month. We'll make it bigger again. Match it up. All right. So the orange is what I was just showing you guys, and you can see there's a yellow and the white going back the whole last month. So Pahala, pretty similar and independent. And you can see that this zone of shallower seismicity has been popping off for a while. This is the flank events back in here, but you can see that there's been quite a bit of adjustment continuing in that summit area for some time here. So that is the story of Mauna Loa, really. There's not a whole lot changed. It's all kind of in a similar context, and we won't go into any more detail than that, Dane. At this point, we can go ahead and switch to some thank yous and some questions, as you like.
All right. Well, first want to thank First want to thank iCare Hawaii for sponsoring this Mauna Loa segment, helping us keep an eye on Mauna Loa. They have really stepped in and helped sponsor this program, ensuring that we spend as much time as possible on Mauna Loa, as well as reactivating our newsletter. So we really thank iCare Hawaii for that. And if you want to get on the newsletter, you can sign up for that at hawaiitracker.com. Just enter your email address and you'll be on that one. So we'll send that out weekly, and also whenever something happens, we will send out an email as well if we go live unexpectedly, things along those lines. So we definitely thank iCare Hawaii for coming in and sponsoring this part of the program for Mauna Loa. Also want to thank the Vai Grant Program, brought to you by County of Hawaii, and that's grant and aid, and they brought us enough money in order to secure the broadcasts of much of our content. So we really appreciate the County of Hawaii for going out on a little bit of a limb with us and funding this program. And we do all want to thank everybody that's in chat too. The viewers really make this thing possible. So appreciate everybody, like, share, subscribe, all that jazz that everybody normally does, but it really does help with the algorithm. So we appreciate everybody that's taking part in that. And I think that gets us through most of all that part. All right, so we got one question here. If anybody does have extra questions, feel free to drop them in either of the chats, and we'll try and address them on Mauna Loa. So first question is from Dude, and it was talking about the GPS on Mauna Loa, and was wondering, wouldn't you look more east-west movement as you move down the mountain to make the determinations on the bulging?
Yeah. I mean, it's you could go the east-west, but we trying to keep it simple. Honestly, that's really what it is. Is trying to focus on one component, the up, right? Ideally, you want to have the vectors and use all three components of it. But since that's not as easy for us to do here, we're just kind of hacking it, looking at the up. Yeah, so it's a good question. It's a good point. I mean, that's the quick way to look at it. Yeah, but we also have relied on the USGS reporting the INSAR patterns being at the summit and all of that as well. And yeah, so we're just trying to get a little bit of insight by just looking quick at the up. But totally right. Who is that? Geodude? Yeah, great insight.
Dude. Dude.
The dude. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, good observation there. And yeah, we could look into that more, but as I mentioned at the top, I was gonna try to streamline a little bit today.
Yvonne asks, so Mauna Loa eruptions often start at the summit and have in the past. If she would start to erupt at the summit again, could there be a possibility that a pocket of old magma will erupt first? So
yeah, I mean, that seems to be the typical pattern, right? We saw that on Kilauea in 2018. We saw it on Kilauea in 1960. Even Hawaii in 59. I mean, many eruptions seem to have that kind of pattern, right? Where you flush out whatever is down there first. And I guess if you flush it out recently, then there might not be as much down there that's older to flush out. But Mauna Loa, it's been a while, and so especially if it's going to move down one of the rift zones, right? That's where you expect it. The further down the rift zone it goes, the more likely you have something stagnant back underground that gets flushed out, rather than just seeing the fresh magma that's been building over the last, 10 or 20 years.
Right. We do have a $35 super chat from our longtime supporter, Gary Bryan. Says, thanks, Philip and Dane. Appreciate the support there, Gary.
Mahalo, Gary, as always.
All right. Crystal asks, I know you've mentioned this before, but to confirm, what again are the signs we want to keep an eye out for as far as tilt and seismic for eruption signs?
So it's the easiest thing to look at is probably just the number of earthquakes, right? And the number of earthquakes have to be quite a bit higher than what we're seeing now. So that's kind of the first step. Having a bunch of earthquakes and having them accelerate in number and frequency. And also, if you see them coming shallower and shallower, then that gives you some clue as well. It helps to have that corroborated by the tilt. The tilt especially is what's giving us more resolution in a short term. The GPS tells us more about what's happening deeper, but since we only have about one data point per day, it's hard to tell what's happening on a day-to-day basis, right? It's more like the big picture, long-term process. However, the ground does seem to swell a little bit faster, even deeper leading up to that. So we might see the GPS swelling first, and the earthquakes coming up as well, and then we might see, it's kind of a little bit of all of it, right? But the easiest thing would be the earthquakes, and in particular the bigger ones, right? And especially if you have a big one on a flank, to me that would be a big domino that would lead to other things happening that would make it more likely.
And as far as tilt goes, that's a very late stage, just before the eruption type signal that we'd be catching, correct?
Yeah, you're probably looking at, if it's coming towards the surface, it could be as little as a few hours where you start seeing tremor and tilt coming up. Yeah.
Right.
Whereas you expect the earthquakes to be building up a little bit more gradually. And you could consider that what we're happening now is part of that buildup. And if it had kept climbing and climbing and climbing, it would be a lot more concerned. But having it seen them climb and then kind of level off, you have to see them climb again and kind of keep climbing, so to speak, right? And that's all with the caveat if it follows the patterns that we expect, right? And of course, it's a natural system; it can always surprise us that way.
Right. And one of the things, Frank Truesdale, who's Mr. Maunaloa himself, was talking about is that gradual escalation of earthquake activity, that seismic buildup, not just a flurry, right, where it comes up quick and then falls off, but that continual activity ramping up type of thing towards something. That's, one of the big ones. Appreciate the question there, Crystal.
Yeah, here's actually put up Frank's slide here and put it back on the screen just to make sure everyone sees it, right? So here's what he put up. What's happening at Mauna Loa? There's small inflation at the summit, upper southwest rift. We have background seismicity at the summit, upper southwest rift and on the flanks. What we're missing, and he writes here, consistent and or persistent seismicity and increasing rates. Right, so it's the increasing rates and the persistent is what I would highlight here. Right, so that's really... Right. It's just not enough, right? And that's where it's really tricky because, you'll see like in the news, there have been 20 earthquakes today, and that's hard to judge by itself, that number 20. Is that a lot or is that a little? If you're from here, you'd know that that's actually a little bit. But if you're not from here, that sounds like a lot, right? So it's all that right. Basis of comparison. If you're going to compare today to back to 1974 or 1983, same thing. Our instruments are more sensitive now, so it might seem like a lot compared to then. But really, it's just because our instruments are more sensitive. So we expect to see a lot of signals. The question, as you guys have pointed out, is how much warning do we get in advance, right? So this is part of that process, and you have to just wait and see, really.
So one the continuation on that. So harmonic tremor, would that be an early indicator or something right before eruption that you would expect? Right before. Yeah. But gas readings, would that be something that you would expect to see go up right before the eruption or an early indicator?
I think on Mauna Loa, you probably, it depends. Probably right before, but if you have some precursory activity, you might release some gas ahead of time too. That would be a signal that something would be coming, right? So like, just to put it in perspective, like for Kilauea, the last time Kilauea reactivated in September 2021, a month before that, we had an intrusion with a whole bunch of earthquakes and, all that movement. And so what we saw on Mauna Loa is similar to that, like similar intrusionary signals. And you could have more intrusions. It could keep doing that. And if it intrudes shallow enough to where the gas can escape, then you might detect the gas. And it might tell you, it's come shallower than before that the gas actually got out. Kind of thing. But we haven't seen that yet.
Got a question from Cecil here who asks, how effective can lava dams be to redirect flows? Can I start that one and then maybe you take the actually. All right. So really the question isn't about the feasibility of the redirection. It comes down to, out here at least, it would come down to two big factors. One would be liability, because as soon as you touch the flow as the government, you now own it. So everything it then takes, you buy. So that they don't want to do that when they could just, let it go where it wants. And they don't assume any liability for that. It's an act of God, or however the insurance wanted to classify it, right? Second would be the cultural resistance to it, right? So there's the Hawaiian culture doesn't really go into diversion and thinks the lavas, holds the lava sacred type thing. So they're not supportive of diversion. And then there's also previous attempts at diversion, mainly the 1960 flow in Kapoho, which was attempted to be diverted with dozens of bulldozers trying to work up as much material to create just a block on this fissure, and they didn't stand a chance. So those three things have to be overcome before we even really get into, what's feasible for, or what would be a successful diversion type thing. Does that sum it up?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I can maybe add a little nuance, right? There's a couple. I mean, Kapoho is interesting because the ground is really so flat over there, and like that really impairs your chances of diversion. In contrast, the Mauna Loa Weather Observatory, that's up at 11,000 feet on the north side of Mauna Loa, has a permanently built V-shaped dam above it, right? Because they're so close to the summit. That might just be the time they need to be able to get evacuated out by helicopter or something like that, right? They can just create a little window where they can have a little more time to escape. So the higher up and the higher your slope is, then the more effective that would be. And like you really want it to be an emergency situation like that. Like those people are really out in the middle of nowhere, and there's no other way out of there if that road gets cut off getting to the observatory. That's an interesting kind of case study there. What would happen with that since it's been built and it's been there for so long? But yeah, that's absolutely right. Like, once you divert it from where it naturally wants to go, then
that's your lava flow.
Yeah, you now own it. It's your fault that it went where it went from that point forward. Yeah. Yeah, and it has been done successfully in other countries, right? We know about Etna, and there are cases of it, but it comes down to the legal systems in each country, and that seems to be a moving target, right?
Right.
Laws are always changing.
They have tried it before, though. 1960, they made a big boy attempt at the thing. Grabbed the cowboy boots and went out there, but it didn't work, right? And that creates people remember that. If it was tried again, people are like, oh, 1960. You have to get over that too.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Mauna Loa itself. I mean, there've been, there's the diversion wall up simply Hilo. I don't think it ever got. Or after, I'm not sure what the history, but there's been diversions above Hilo. There've been the bombing of the flows above Hilo.
Right.
There's a long peppered history of that. But yeah, ultimately, it's not going to happen. That's all you need to really know. Not in the United States.
Okay, last question, I think. Sandy asked, at the community meeting this past Saturday, they spoke briefly of the radial vents on Mauna Loa. If a radial vent goes off, will other radial vents close by erupt too? Like, will it reactivate those?
No, it's not like a reactivation necessarily. It's more about the pathway. I think historically, so you can have more than one crack in the ground. I want to say that there might have been like 5 different cracks that when that flow in the 1800s came out. But it's all in a fairly small area, so you can consider it just one source area, and it's flowing downhill from there. And of course, like it's slightly this way, slightly that way can affect which little gully or valley it goes in, which can matter long term. But it's more or less the same area that it's coming from, and it's like a new crack through the ground rather than reactivating an old one.
Right.
Is there anything?
So it'll build a new cone as opposed to reactivating an old one.
Yeah. And when the slopes are really steep, you don't really get that big a cone because everything is flowing downhill in a way, right? But stuff does kind of spatter out and land, and you do get a little bit of it. Is there anything else you want to add about that community meeting on Saturday, Dan, this last week in Kona?
Yeah, it was good to everybody get out there and see the community meeting. One of the things that the community there brought up, and I can definitely see it, is the traffic issues, right, in that area. Saying that it takes 45 minutes to pick up school kids, from the elementary school every day. So what happens if everybody, gets an evacuation order? And that's something that, the first responders, the emergency managers, all those guys are going to have to really figure out in there, because there's no resilience towards like the thing being stress tested, with a traffic accident at an intersection or something like that. It can't happen. Everything has to go, pretty flawlessly. And, that whole process, still trying to figure out exactly what that entails, when things are going to be called. And it's, I think people know, but you won't know until it actually happens type thing, when the calls will come out and the exact specifics of it. Everybody has a plan, but we'll see how it actually goes. But yeah, that was one of the things out of the community meeting, was the traffic concerns, and that's going to be hard, right? And people, one of the messages was if it gets to the point where it's the worst case scenario and you're in a car and lava's coming at you type thing, and the traffic prevents it from moving, well, just get out of the car and walk away. Just the volcano will take possessions. Don't let it take you.
Yeah.
But otherwise, pretty straightforward update. Nothing really new compared to the Pahala and Ocean View. This was the third meeting of this series of meetings by Civil Defense and USGS, and I think they're talking about a fourth one in Mililii in December potentially, but not set in stone yet. And if we figure that out, if they do make it, we'll bring that one to you as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, one thing to mention, Dane, is just what we posted about how Ken Han, scientist in charge, described how the alerts would go. Right, you expect an alert first, like a orange alert if there's a increase of the seismicity and tremor and all that, and expected some eruption, and then like a warning red for erupting at the summit, and then another red warning for it moving into a rift zone, and then another red warning for it leaving the rift zone and flowing downhill. So there's a series of warnings of where it would go, and it's not like the most immediate thing that's going to happen is suddenly there's lava on the road, right? There's going to be a few things that happen before that. Now, the worst case is Southwest Rift, where that happens in a matter of hours. So that's why they talk all about that now. The other thing that I wanted to clarify, because I've overheard some conversations in the community here, is you look at the map of Mauna Loa and you see like that 51% of the island covered by Mauna Loa, and everyone's having to get ready everywhere on an island. It's not like all that area is going to get covered at once. It's going to be a very, very, very small piece of that. It's going to be where the lava actually affects. So it's not like if it erupts, there's nowhere to evacuate to, because there's all that 51% is off limits. It's going to be only one tiny piece of it is going to be affected, and you can evacuate other parts of Mauna Loa that are not affected, just to the north or just to the south. You won't have to like drive to Kohala, for example, to get out of the way. That makes sense. It's going to be a localized to one side of the mountain kind of thing, more than likely, right? So hard to understand all of that, given how much information is coming out from USGS and Civil Defense. But that's one thing I thought I could try to clarify here. Right.
I did want to mention that, Dude brings it up, but it is important. Like the presentation Saturday in Kīlauea, they did not really go into the earthquakes that we saw presented by Ken Han in Pahala. And there were certain spots in that Pahala presentation that were directly tuned to Pahala, but there really was a lot of stuff that could be included and cover most of the island, and still be talking about the same, still give the same presentation, just not as much about the faults and things like that down in Pahala, maybe in the focus. But that was, so the meeting kind of ended pretty early, and that was, I was kind of surprised that earthquake segment, which was really good. We do have a video for it if anybody wants to catch that. It's on our channel, but it wasn't included. I think people could have heard that, because they're definitely going to feel it if one of those big ones come. They're not far enough away that it's like, oh, what was that? It's going to be very noticeable, as in try not to, slip and fall type thing. Still, if it's a really big one.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put this slide here on a screen that actually shows these. Let's see if it actually will load here. Shows the magnitude 6 and larger earthquakes since 1868 in the island of Hawaii, and you can see there's quite a lot here in the Pahala zone, but there is this fault zone over here in Kalakakua, South Kona that has had a 6.9, a 6.3, a 6.0. So it's not lots of little faults. There's one kind of big one, but certainly that area is occasionally having bigger earthquakes as well. Right. It's just that if we were to bet, if this was Vegas, because Kilauea over here in the south flank of Kilauea is the one that's been moving the most. We just saw that 6.9 in 2018. Then it makes sense that Mauna Loa is going to more easily move in this direction rather than the other way. But you never know. It's caught. It could pop that way up potentially also. But so earthquakes, yeah, for sure. Something to prepare for, especially in South Kona as well. Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, I think that kind of does it for the Mauna Loa segment. I'll try and answer a couple questions that popped up in chat. We will get into Kilauea, and then we'll get into some more questions. So if I don't answer it, hope maybe we'll get it at the end. If you do have some questions, drop them in chat, and we'll try and catch them in the next.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Dane. So I'll start with a little community corner here, and I just want to shout out Kaleos one more time here. Our former sponsor, just give them one extra shout out here. They've reopened their original location in Pahoa last week, Friday. So now both locations appear to be open. So shout out to those guys. Mahalo. Also coming up this weekend on Saturday, November 12th. Let me see if I can get this bigger. Is the Puna Makahiki event happening in Nanavale Community Association. It's going to be keiki activities, health and well-being demonstrations, preparedness demonstrations and resources, and celebration of the community's history and resilience through storytelling, performances, including live music, we're led to believe, and art exhibits. So hosted by multiple resilience hubs in the Puna area, but actually held at Nanavale Community Hub, Resilience Hub. And it runs from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we will be there with a table. Excuse me. Yeah, so we'll be there talking story. Come and check us out there if you are in the area. Ask questions in person if you like. So that's on Saturday. I wanted to mention the National Park events, starting with tomorrow, Veterans Day. There is free entrance to the national parks for Gold Star families and veterans. Thank you for your service. That's part of all the November slate, which includes that free entrance. And actually, it's interesting that the National Park Service is introducing a new Veterans Lifetime Pass and Gold Star Family Interagency Lifetime Pass available for the first time tomorrow. To all the federal recreation areas. So even if you're not a veteran, tomorrow Veterans Day is a fee-free day nationwide for all federal parks. So that's tomorrow. There's stewardship on Saturday, and the Birth of Kahuku program we've been highlighting over in Kahuku area near Ocean View, southwest rift of Mauna Loa. There is a walk on Saturday, 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. And following weeks, there are after darks, and we'll just leave those for the future now and just highlight what's happening over this next week. So one last thing from the National Park Service. There's a news release came out earlier this week that the Uekahuna Overlook parking lot and restrooms have been temporarily closed to protect Nene. There's a nice photo of a breeding pair of Nene with their chick. And the release that's saying that beginning yesterday afternoon, west of the intersection of Kilauea Overlook, the road is going to be closed. And the trail is also closed as well. So you can still go to Kilauea Overlook and hike on that Crater Rim Trail, but at some point you'll come across a closure because of the Nene. So that is the long and short of it. If you're curious, the Nene is our state bird, the Hawaiian goose, one of the only species still remaining from historic times. In 1952, there were only 30 Nene statewide, and efforts to recover began in the 1970s, with a program continuing today, and close to 200 birds in the park from sea level to 8,000 feet at present, and a much larger population that's outside the park as well that has been fostered here. So that is the community updates here, and with that, we'll switch to the lava viewing. Since we're talking about the Wikahuna area, I can show you guys where that actually is. Here's the map of the national park. Entrance is over here, and so if you go all the way around the north side, Wikahuna is this site over here. And this is a site that, for lava viewing, could see this eastern side of the crater floor, where there's not been as much happening in recent weeks anyways, so it's actually a fortuitous time for this closure to occur. Because there's not as much traffic for lava viewing there at the moment anyways. However, there are still 2 other viewing sites. That's Kupina'ipali over here near the visitor center, and Devastation Trail over here and to the Kanakako'i overlook, as we've been mentioning for some time. And we'll just keep it short today and just play you guys this last week from the B1 camera. Lava lake is off in the distance. You need some kind of zooming device to get a better view, but you might notice there's a little bit of a glow here in the foreground as well. And that's something we'll investigate in a couple minutes here, but there could be some slight little variations on that surface that are different for people to see on a day-to-day basis here. So that's interesting as well. But moving on to the main hazard of the eruption, which is a volcanic gas. In a national park for viewing, it's been pretty good. Today's been a fairly strong wind day. Here's the national park map. Plumes blowing off to the southwest. Let's see what the wind says, 13 miles an hour. So that when we get it a little bit higher like that, then plume is more concentrated and it affects less areas, but it can affect them more intensely. So all the viewing areas are in a green, upwind of that plume at present. If we go to the charts for the last day, we can see it's basically green everywhere all the way down for both SO2 and particulates. So really the stronger wind has helped keep the air clean in the viewing areas. Here is the VOG forecast from the VOG mapping project, University of Hawaii. And there's our source at the triangle, Kilauea volcano, and the effect of the VOG moving around here. So it's clearing out, but it is moving through the areas, especially in the Ka'u Desert. Especially in the Ka'u Desert and the downwind areas of Pahala and Na'alehu Ocean View, as usual. So this is probably looking repetitive, but that's just something we want to document continually, that there is still ongoing effects, because oftentimes these communities are forgotten about as far as the impact of the volcano here. So it's still happening, and still an issue for those that live downwind. But today, if we look at the purple air map, we'll see that there's really not a whole lot in the last couple of days that's come into the hazardous levels. Let's let it load here. Whoa. There we go. So start up here by volcano, 0, and I'll just keep clicking. I'm going to put them on a graph here, so that's showing 0. Let's try this other volcano station. Add it to the graph. It's also still in a green. And 1 spike up, it's still in a green. Let's add Wood Valley. A little bit higher, but still in a green. Let's come down to Kahuku. Kahuku, are you coming? Kahuku, coming up, it's still in a green. Go to another Kahuku cross fence, higher elevation there. And all still in the green. And so it could keep going, but you see that there's still variation in the amount of gas being blown around, but it hasn't reached those as intense levels at those sensor stations within the last couple of days here. So that is the gas. And we'll move on to our visual observations here and jump right into the S1 camera that we showed you to start the update here. And there is that persistent lava lake glowing at night. You see glow from the West Vent Complex there, the West Vent Pond there, all these other little glowing holes. So you've been seeing persistent glow from here. But it's really this spot that's east of that central island that I'm going to zoom in on and see what we can see a little bit more closely here, right? So probably saw it, went flat, went from 2 smaller holes to 1 larger one. So it seems like it's opened up there's a little bit of collapse that happened there to expose that. And you see the other glowing event just to the side over here as well. Play it again so you can see that maybe one more time. 3 or 4 little spots, and then it opens up and pops in, and that's a bigger hole. So it's not clear if this is a pit that's got lava in it, like the southeast pit we see over here to the to the west a little bit, or if this is more like a skylight where lava is flowing through it like a lava tube and you have an opening to see into there. Not quite clear from these perspectives and from this resolution, but that is what you see. Here is that southeast pit, in case you're wondering, as a similar analog to what might be happening over here to the other side. Right, and that southeast pit you see is overturning and flashing, but it's actually many times crusted over now, more so than before. So that's crusting over process is continuing in that southeast pit. And that's our view from the south, from the S1 camera. Looking at the thermal time lapse, here it is. We can see the glowing spot up here at the top, and you'll see it open up here on a 6th. Here's a 5th, and here comes a number of 6th. Pops open, and there's that spot. And you can see nothing anywhere else on the perimeter of the crater. So it's not like your typical ooze flows we've seen in the past, where we've seen them around the perimeter. It's more of a small minor change on the surface, closer to the center of this uplift area. So it could be that it's just swelling upwards, and that made the rocks unstable, and they fell in to make that bigger pit that's glowing, or maybe expose some lava, or expose the lava tube, perhaps. Hard to tell exactly there. We'll zoom it in. Get a little bit better view here, and that southeast pit here. Still see it hot and glowing right in there. It's our new vent. There, and down here at the bottom, west vent pond and the west vent itself, all glowing. So thermal is nice to see through the day and nighttime cycles, and makes it more consistent, easier to look at. You can see that activity still ongoing there. The visual from a KW camera, day and night, slightly different views. That glowing spot's way over here in the distance. And you can see the wider view of not a whole lot going on elsewhere in the perimeter of the crater, as far as heat or glow or anything like that. Do it one more time and zoom it in, so you can get a little bit better view here. Central Island and that glowing spot, 1, 2 right there. Southeast pit and all those different areas glowing. So one last time lapse to show you guys. This is a V1 camera zoomed into that persistent lava lake. See, its level is actually fairly unchanging over the last week. You see the southeast pit still flashing, staying open. It's crusted over a little bit, as we mentioned last week, but still opening on the inside, and lava level is not really changing a whole lot. I'll play it one more time and I'll zoom it in. You can really just get an idea. The lava it fluctuates a little bit, and the camera moves probably more so than the lava fluctuates throughout this last week of time lapse. So that is a V1 camera, and that brings our visual observations this week to a close. So moving on to next will be monitoring. Look at our monitoring signals here. And starting with lava depth, here it is for the last week. See, a week ago we were at 372.224, somewhere in there, and this week we're at 372.4. So really it's gone up and down, or down and up, and it hasn't gained anything in the last week here, right? We're really fluctuating, but not really gaining, not adding any volume, as we can tell from the depth here. The laser pointing to that central area, right? And of course, this is only one point in that entire crater. It could be swelling more on the edges than in the middle, but at the very middle, we can see here that it's really not gathering any volume. It's not accumulating at all. It does correspond to the variations of the ground tilt. Here's a ground tilt for the last week as well, so you can see it's following that pattern, but really not changing apart from that, right? That's the main influence. And on net, it seems like there's not any extra lava coming in. We don't see a whole lot for the last month. Once again, we have some extra noise in the data right in here that skews our entire scale. But you can still see that overall there's not a whole lot of change. We were down at 371-ish about a month ago, and all the way over here, and maybe we're at 372 or maybe 3, but that's really not a whole lot of change in a month. It's really very, very, very little. Having it zoomed out makes that more obvious, I suppose. There are little fluctuations as well. You can't see those with this scale, but here's the last month of summit tilt. You can see the deflation-inflation cycles that are the normal background here, and your overall pattern pretty steady, maybe rising slightly back in here, but it's not convincing really, like it's swelling in those shallow levels that much. Looking at the SO2, we have to note the scale. We're at the 720 is our maximum value on the left here. So our measurement from earlier in the month of 700 is actually the high point in the graph here. We're used to seeing this up in the thousands usually. The two most recent points we have here within the last couple of days are down in the 500s, right? We have a 580 and we have a 550 or so. So gas value is also trending downwards, right? So we have less lava coming into the lava lake. We have less gas coming out. Here's the lava depth plot. Zoomed out for the whole last year. And coming to the GPS here, this is north and south across the main caldera of Kilauea. And we see previously that intrusion we had back on September 20th, where it seemed like there was some blockage underground and magma wasn't quite making it to the surface. Caused that intrusion, it popped it back up and restored it. So we restored our trend here. You see we've had a couple other little wiggles up and down through there, and the most recent one over here, just within the last week. So it's almost like there are little blockages trying to occur, but they're being pushed and cleared out. And we're still seeing in this deeper area, right? The GPS is showing us this deeper signal. Is still seeing the swelling, the rising distance between the 2 points across the caldera, north and south. And interestingly, we'll go down to, this is the Pu'o'o GPS, north and south across the East Rift Zone at Pu'o'o, to the Jacuzzi station from the North Pu'o'o Crater Station. And you can see that over the last year, it's been on this steady contraction, those points getting closer together. But just here in the last, less than a month or so, it seems like it's flattened a bit, right? And this may be a slowing of that contraction, which might mean that magma is actually leaking into that area a little bit to cause it to stop sagging in, but it actually can maintain because there's actually some input going into that East Rift Zone area by Pu'o'o. So that's the big picture GPS, but let's dive into this a little bit more. Let's come into our 2-year GPS data here. And this is Uekahuna. And I mentioned this before, east, north, and up. And the trend essentially is just going west and north and up. But the up signal at Uekahuna seems to have been faster prior to recently, where it maybe has flattened out. So not as much up at Uekahuna. And you see a very similar pattern here at Byron's Ledge in the east, where also was going up, and it seems to have flattened out or decreased a little bit here as well. And if I quickly scan other stations, here's on the southwest outlet. The up does not change, it's still going up. Greater Rim in the southeast, still going up. A little extra noise in here, but still I'd call it going up at this point. And elsewhere, you can look on the East Rift, we're going down. Kana no Yohamo, it's going down. And you can see these stations are getting pushed to the east and to the south. East and south and down. Kamoamoa towards Pu'o'o, east and south and down. Pu'o'o, east and south and down. The other station at Jacuzzi, let's look a little more closely, is going east and south and down as well. So really both stations across the rifts have been going down. However, the Jacuzzi east plot is actually rising east a little faster. So it's something more localized that's just south of Pu'o'o, south of the rift zone area. And that could be a little minor signal of potentially the magma is just starting to affect that area, but hasn't spread to a larger area quite yet. We'll have to wait and see about that. But that's that's probably why we're seeing that flattening, is this little local adjustment happening here. So let's see what that leads to. But crucially, the areas are not swollen enough that nothing is still rising. It's all still settling down, even if it's spreading apart. And one last point, this is over here at Jonica, which is the closer station to the lower East Rift Zone, not quite down to Leilani, but you can see it's really had no change, and it's up, or it's north, or it's east here, right? It's a little bit more scattered because it's less, well, I guess it was less coherent there, right? But yeah, really the scatter is normal, as you can see going back the whole last year, and does not convince of any change there either. So we move into the south flank, and the south flank's a little different. The south flank near the summit of the volcano at Ahua, you can see going up still, east and south and up, and east and south and up at Puhimau, down the Devil's Throat, and it's not so convincing up anymore. And anywhere else we look, I can scan through all these other stations, don't really see up hardly anywhere. And I know that these are kind of hard to, I'm just going through a lot of graphs, it's hard to tell what's what. So today I thought I would pull up my Google Earth. Here's my Google Earth. And I've superimposed on here, right? There's the map of summit. Rift zone goes like this. Superimpose on here where these GPS stations actually are, right? So if I'm gonna zoom into the summit area here, I've mentioned Uikahuna going up, that's this one, and Byron's Ledge going up, that's this one, but Crater Rim not going up, right? So you're really seeing, or I'm sorry, going down, right? So these are the down stations here and here. So this area north is going down, and then the area that's going up is just this upper south flank and the upper southeast rift zone. These are the stations that have a little bit of up, and really not as much this one, but really these four. And then Pu'o and south of Pu'o is all the way over here. And so everything is getting pushed east and down and to the north here. So what it really seems like is the volcano is swelling, and that summit magma reservoir that connects to the upper east rift connector all through here, that's kind of all one zone. That's what's swelling, and then the pressure in here is pushing everything, all these stations over to this. They're all feeling this pressure. And so as that is the case, there's a bend in the rift zone here, but the magma wants to come around it. It could well be moving through there and starting to fill that area more passively, where the pressure is built up more over here. But there is still some flow coming in the upper east rift zone towards Pu'o based on these signals. So I just thought I'd put it in a map perspective for you guys there, and shows you more or less where the signals are and where they are not. If we go to the tilt, it's not as informative, but here are the stations we have. Let it catch up here. So today, 1 week at Uikahuna, we're going to zoom out. This is all 1 month plots at Uikahuna in the northwest, Sand Hill in the east. You don't see a whole lot of obvious. I mean, we have the earthquake spike here as well, but it's following the same pattern as we see at the Uikahuna station. And we really don't have much else we can look at. At the summit, Escape Road is showing a movement in that upper east rift connector a little bit, but it's hard to untangle that. And otherwise, we see down at Jonica still that deflating pattern, kind of sagging pattern. Coming to Pu'o, though, you do see a little funny signal here. And it's just worth reminding you guys that 1 week ago was when we had that big rain storm coming through here. And not to say that this is only rain, but this is mostly rain signal that we see here having affected tilt pattern, as it's so localized, and you see it actually came back down to its regular level here after seeing a little excursion. So got to be careful with these things. The tilt especially can be very, very tricky, and corroborated with other activity in the area. And that's why living nearby puts us in good position to share when it's pouring rain over there or not. So that's most likely what you see here, is that rain signal. Not much else we can see on that tilt. However, we do have this image that came out in Volcano Watch last week, which was an INSAR, and it's a noisy INSAR. So be careful how we interpret this. However, we can come down to the caption of the INSAR here, and it does say in here, let's see. It does say some slight, less than a fraction of an inch or millimeter range deformation of Mauna Loa and the southeast rift zone of Kilauea is visible in these images, yet hard to discern from atmospheric noise. So they are saying there is a slight deformation on the southeast rift zone of Kilauea. So let's zoom in on this a little bit.
Take your time.
All right, there's
not that much more to go through.
Yeah, I'm almost there.
Yeah.
All right, so here's the INSAR, and you can see that deep hole, that's Pu'o. So it seems to be, it's hard to interpret exactly, but it seems to be a deformation center right in here near Pu'o. And the lines don't go all the way through because there's forest in here, and they subtract. You really can't measure the INSAR in a forest. There's a little bit exposed north of Maka'apui crater right over here, and it looks like there might be a second center. Hard to tell, but we have heard of this secondary reservoir under Kananoio Hamo, Maka'apui area through here. And that sits within a broader, if I were to extrapolate, I'd say that this is a big bullseye that looks like this, right? Where this thing actually sits in. So kind of one big area of that upper east rift zone with two smaller centers, perhaps. Just guessing, educated guess here. But it does show that magma has been filling. This is over the last 6 months, filling into that upper east rift zone area, right? Not really seeing it beyond there. But to Pu'o'o itself, that seems to be more or less a boundary of that zone. And that's not unexpected. We've seen prior to 2020 breakout of Kilauea Summit, the magma was built up all the way through here, and it actually flowed back as that eruption relieved pressure. And now we're seeing the pressure summit has reversed, and now the pressure is moving back down the rift zone and has reached as far as here, right? So that's the big picture on Kilauea's east rift. And that in the context of our volume, right? We showed you guys the volume estimates and plots, and the most important thing here is this right into the graph where the last 3 measurements of volume have been all more or less the same here. This is million cubic meters that's filled the crater, and this goes back to September actually, so really haven't had a whole lot of change in September. We see the GPS showing magma coming into the volcano. It's not reaching the surface. We see sign that at least not very much, right? The surface is still circulating lava, we can see that, but there's a lot of heat in there, so that could have to see. It could continue for some time, or I'll put it out there, I wouldn't be super surprised if that summit paused at some point because of this low summit input, right? We'll have to just wait and see what happens there. But it wouldn't be shocking if there was a small pause up there, given how little gas is coming out and how little magma is reaching the surface up there. And we see signs of it actually filling the underground areas of Kilauea, right? Underground under the summit. I've just showed you guys underground under the southeast rift connector. And let's switch to our earthquakes here. Show you guys Kilauea earthquakes. And the overall rates for the last month, nothing really jumps out there. It's been pretty steady. Normal variation you see through here. Over the last week, you see there's the map of the earthquakes at the summit. And you can see building pressure under the summit that corresponds to that magma building underground, but not quite getting all the way out. In fact, that's what caused that intrusion on September 20th, not quite 2 months ago. So we knew that we're primed for this new phase of Kilauea activity, and we're seeing more development of that phase, more underground filling as opposed to surface filling. But I really wanted to tie this together by moving back to the whole last month. Here's a whole last month plot of the earthquakes. And if you look at this, now you can see more clearly this upper southwest rift, seismic southwest rift, also seems to have some seismicity as well, right? So it's quite possible that magma is also active in this upper southwest rift connector as well. So the upper southeast rift connector through here, we showed it as far as Pu'o'o right through there. You might ask, well, where's the earthquakes there? And the answer would be because the pathway is open, you don't need to have any earthquakes to actually break any rock. Earthquakes are breaking rock. So if the pathway is open, nothing needs to be broken. It can just flow through there without any earthquakes, right? So when you see earthquakes under the summit, it means it's not reaching to the surface all the way. It's breaking rocks underground. It's just pressurizing, filling those voids underground. It's pushing to the southwest rift, possibly there, and causing or pressurizing that area and causing rocks to break. So it's not really flowing through there, but it's trying to build pressure in there. And that in itself wouldn't be surprising. One last thing we'll tie together here is going back to August 23rd or 30th, 2021, prior to that September breakout of lava at the summit of Kilauea, we had an intrusion. This is a USGS map of a likely deformation area right in this oval right through here, showing earthquakes in these circle areas right through here. And you can see it's a place where we know magma from the summit area has a pathway that it did inject into there a little over a year ago. And so seeing the pressure underground, it could easily have just resupplied this area, pressurized it a little bit more to cause it to just quake a little bit more in that same region. To make it a little more clear to see, here's a screenshot I grabbed of the earthquakes late in that sequence, just showing a lot more in those times, right? So what we're seeing now is a lot less than that, but you can see similar location and could well be related there. So all that is basically the pattern of Kilauea's filling underground, more so than at the surface now. That's a little bit different than before. So that's our theme, right? Mauna Loa filling and swelling underground, and Kilauea filling and swelling underground too. For the most part, that's the same on both volcanoes. But Kilauea has a little venting valve at the top right now. Right? That the lava lake is visible and makes for great viewing in a national park. So I was gonna wrap it up with two last things. One is just noting that this data all comes from the USGS HVO. Once again, to credit our source here in the most recent update of Kilauea volcano today, stating no significant changes at the summit or in either rift zone. So what we're talking about today are interesting pattern changes, but they're not a significant change in what's been happening. It's just a continuation of that same pattern progression we've been seeing for a few years now. And that means no increased hazard at this point either, right? And of course, everywhere on any rift zone should have preparedness, but for anyone in the lower east rift zone, there's really no cause for alarm yet. We know at some point it's going to refill the rift zone, but it hasn't really progressed further than it did in the last few years yet. The last thing I need to mention here today is our USGS Weekly Volcano Watch. And today's article is a Volcanoes of American Samoa. This is mostly review of the activity that occurred from late July to early September. But it's worth noting that this was another situation like August of 2021, like what's happening so far at Mauna Loa, where you have a whole bunch of earthquakes. In this case, they had, let's see what they say, as many as 30 to 40 earthquakes per hour, right? But this did not lead to an eruption. It was a movement of magma underground, and it's not uncommon that magma can inject and find space underground, and that's the end of the activity, right? It's as good of a relief of the pressure as it is to come to the surface. In some cases, it's enough to just inject somewhere in the shallow underground. So I won't recount all of that. We've talked about all these histories of volcanoes in the area, but they're essentially telling the story that Samoa is a hotspot like Hawaii. And in that case, the hotspot's thought to be at the east end underneath Wailu'u Seamount. It's still submerged with these Ofu'olosega and Ta'u Islands, these ones over here. Seismicity was occurring in this area more or less than there. Part of this Vi trend, the most recent trend of the hotspot, but there's an older trend, the Malu trend, that connects Malu, Tulaga, Malutut, and Tutuila, the main population center of American Samoa over here. West. So that is Volcano Watch this week. That's posted on hawaiitracker.com if you want to go and read that in more detail. And that is it, Dane. I am wrapped up there. A little shorter than usual today.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm gonna say about like a half hour, I think, by the end of things. We got a few more questions here to go through. First one I'm gonna break up a little bit because there's almost, you could do two questions with it, but you got to end it shorter. So first part of the question is with all what you just said, is the hotspot putting out more material right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think long-term pattern would be, the answer would be yes, right? We've seen increased seismicity in our Pahala, the deep seismicity, for a while, several years, and don't know for sure exactly what's causing that, but one possibility is increased supply of the hotspot. So that's possible. And we've discussed as recently as last week the connection between Kilauea and Mauna Loa, and how often when one is doing its thing, the other will kind of back off, unless the supply from the mantle is high enough to feed them both and they can both swell at the same time. So more so that than anything, seeing both volcanoes filling underground at the same time right now is exactly, yes, that's probably where the question comes from, and I would agree. It seems likely that the supply from the hotspot is higher. And it's not like a day-to-day thing, it's like a long-term, it's been happening for a few years now, I think.
Right.
And really, you can go back to, prior to 2018 on Kilauea, right? We saw it from 2008 to 18. Those 10 years of built-up magma that couldn't get out of the volcano of Kilauea, right? That's how long it took for Kilauea to break open its flank eruption, right? And something else to consider as we're looking at Mauna Loa now too.
Right. So the real question, we're gonna go the real one that he submitted. Brian submitted, is the hotspot putting out more material right now, or is the large size of Hawaii compared to the other islands just due to erosion?
The large size of Hawaii Island compared to the others is due to the fact that it's floating higher than the others. And the best answer to this is, I wonder if I can find my image of Maui Nui here, but if you look at the islands of Maui, Molokai, Lanai, and Kaho'olawe, those are all one large edifice, one big island, right? It used to be one big island that's actually submerged below sea level, and now only the tops of the volcanoes stick out. So you really have West Maui and Haleakala, East Maui, kind of one island, but you have Molokai, Lanai as the tips of other parts of that main edifice. I wonder if I can find that here in my archive, but it might take me a minute, Dane, if you have any other questions to pull up in the meantime.
All right. I'll try and do the next one then. Shimmer asks, what has historically been the cultural response to eruptions, and how do you balance culture and science? Well, it is a balance. That is the correct, way to phrase that. There's most of the time, though, the convenient thing is that the science and the what the culture would talk about the volcano is very similar, right? The culture arose and evolved due to live interactions with the volcano over centuries, right? So they got used to living with the volcano, so that there's things in the culture where it's just resilience to volcanic eruption is baked into it. We saw that in 2018. One of the big things is that everybody's kind of like, okay, well, we just evacuated. Now what do we do? Right. And there was nobody really to answer that question except for the Hawaiians from Kalapana, who came up and just took charge, really, because they've lived it for so long, and it goes back generations living it. So it's just, they expected, as opposed to the a shock to the system. It's just another eruption. This is how they do it. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of, especially with dealing with the eruption, right? The eruption science and where the rocks break and how they break, that's all one thing. But at the end of the day, how you deal with it, you don't have to fully understand the volcano to be able to live on it and move when you need to move, type of thing. Find it, Phil?
Yeah, I did find it. Yeah, that sounds good. I don't really have anything to add to that. So let me put that image here on the screen. Here's our graphic from the Smithsonian Institution that goes back to 1.2 million years ago, showing the shape of Maui Nui, and you can see fast forwarding through time. The green is the area above sea level, and as the island sinks, today we just have the tips of Maui Nui sticking above the ocean there, right? But really, that is one large edifice. That's
right.
Probably that's the map version. I might have like a bathymetry map here somewhere, but that's probably good enough, I think.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that gets us through all the questions. Appreciate everybody that turned out. We do go live Thursdays at 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. That is our normal time that we come on. Unless something happens, then we'll go live, or if like an event's going on, we'll try and bring that to you. We will be at the Makahiki Festival this Saturday in Nanavali. If you're around Puna, definitely stop by that. There's free music. The Kalapana Awa band is going to be playing, so great music, really. I mean, top of the line for Puna. So come check it out, and we'll talk to you there. Also want to thank our one last time. Just thank iCare Hawaii, for sponsoring our Mauna Loa segment. Really appreciate that one. And I think that'll do it for me. And you can continue on with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that that Kalapana Alpha band played at the Pu'uhonua Puna hub quite a bit, and it reminds me a lot of that. When we were down at the hub in Pahoa in 2018, right? How important the music was, and
it's huge.
Connected us, and gave us an outlet. And it was really something, right? Several times we streamed just the music from the hub because that was needed, right?
Right.
In 2018 as a break from all the crazy information that was coming out at the time. So
that is an interesting point. Like, kind of for all of us, the Awa band's kind of a disaster relief music, and it will always be that. When things get crazy, it's kind of nice to have that soothing music going on, and they were that in 2018 for sure.
Yeah, so it's not just any old band kind of thing. These are connected to exactly the entire history of what we are. Yeah, so just to put that out there. Yeah, and hopefully we'll see Kaika there. We'll request our intro song if we can.
Right. Sounds good. All right, yeah, we'll see you there if anybody can show up. It starts at I think 9, runs till about 2 tomorrow into the afternoon, so it's going to be going for a little while.
I think it says till 4. No, we might not be there till 4 ourselves. We'll see.
Might not be there till 4, but we'll be there.
We'll be there earlier today.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Dane. And that's it for me, too. So thank you guys once again. Thank you, iCare Hawaii. Thank you, all our super chats. And from HawaiiTracker.com in DuPont, I'm Philip Ong.